identifying barriers for the agency to address the backlog include staffing levels, vacancies, and turnovers. So the net reduction in funding for personnel services, OAH will be unable to hire staff. In fact, in the testimony that Chief Judge Curry submitted here for this hearing, she specifically highlighted that OAH will need to maintain vacancies at 10% of its FTEs, which is 10 positions, to meet its budget. Further, as others have highlighted, the funding for contractual services has been eliminated from the proposed budget, meaning OAH will be unable to use temporary workers to fill the gap. The McNamee report also stated that the number of FTEs needed to build capacity might be reduced through process improvements and the adoption of readily available technology. We understand that OAH is working on the public-facing access issues that we've enumerated in our written testimony, but we're concerned about whether OAH will have the staffing and funds to roll out these necessary services. In addition to the public-facing technologies, OAH's inability to fill current vacancies will also impact its ability to bring greater efficiencies to its technology practices. As Nancy stated, Chief Judge Curry talked about at the performance oversight hearing some of the technology augmentation that OAH would like to explore. Under the mayor's proposed budget, the capacity to do that new work does not appear to be funded. And so we urge the committee to talk with OAH about what the barriers are and how we can help. If there are budget implications, either for staffing or technology, we ask the council to provide OAH with the fiscal resources it needs to meet these goals. I do want to end with recognition for the important and concrete improvements made to the OAH Resource Center. As we've noted in previous testimony, upwards of 90% of litigants at OAH have no lawyer and navigate the complex legal procedures by themselves. The OAH Resource Center helps these litigants maneuver through the complicated legal territory that OAH faces. We applaud Chief Judge Curry and her colleagues for their attention to strengthening the Resource Center. But any gains that we're getting through this will be for naught if critical staffing levels and technology additions are not attainable. OAH affects the day-to-day lives of thousands of DC residents. Funding for increased staffing is needed to ensure the agency can adjudicate disputes in a fair and efficient manner. Improvements in technology are needed so that litigants can easily access case-related information and OAH can achieve needed efficiencies. We're grateful to the council's work in providing vital support for the prosecution of legal rights by DC residents. You know how vital these services are to these residents. We applaud the work that supports equal justice for all. We're grateful for the opportunity to testify and to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now hear from Fritz Mulhauser.
Thank you very much. I'm Fritz Mulhauser, member of the board of the DC Open Government Coalition and co-chair of our board's legal committee, Ward 6 resident for many years. We're here as a friend of the court. We've spoken to you many times about details of public access to information at the court, but the moment is existential. The basic functions are threatened. My colleagues have not stressed the magnitude of the sheer numbers. 32,000 cases are on track to be submitted to the office this year. That's more cases than in the civil, domestic violence, family, and other units of the Superior Court. This is enormous, and it's been growing while the staff official level is steady, which consultants last year said was under-resourced by at least 10 positions. And yet this year's caseload has thousands more than last year. The only inevitable result is longer and longer times to resolution and disposition of cases. There simply needs to be a very close look at the budget cuts that the mayor has imposed. It's hard for the community to evaluate these competing narratives that, on the one hand, agencies just carry vacancies to hide their true staffing levels, which was said on the dais just a few days ago. versus the agency's argument that they're up against the hottest labor market in decades for precisely the specialized staff they need in legal and technical areas. I urge you to try to sort that out. But the numbers suggest that they need attention and resources to innovate, just as courts throughout the country did under the COVID pressures. They struggled to adapt everything they did to a new reality, and the same is needed these days to cope with a caseload that is stretching them beyond belief. They've moved to all virtual hearings, but that means secure and reliable voice technology and retrieval of the record for judges and litigants. That's new technical challenges. Who is cut? Technical staff. They've committed finally to publishing their opinions as the law requires. That requires software, improvements and innovations. Their case management software is years old and probably takes duct tape and Band-Aids every few weeks. Yet we're expanding to novel software solutions to help the public, but we're cutting technical staff. We've often spoken about that particular problem of access to opinions, and it's good to know that it's expected to happen this year. Let me just close by saying the council has been on top of this issue for some years and especially stressed the need, which accompanies all good software development, to talk to users. And they recommended that OCTO, the technology office, and our organization and others in the community be brought in to help design a system that will truly help users. We haven't seen that yet, and we look forward to it as the software innovation develops later this year. Please encourage the office to include users in the design of a user-facing system so that people can find the information about past cases that will help them plan their own litigation. Number one, ask questions about these staff cuts and how they will impact the treatment of cases. Number two, right-size the budget so that they have the resources they need, not only to keep up with the growing caseload, but to innovate. A wonderful innovation of drawing the staff together to talk about the work just happened a few weeks ago. Build on that. Ask for a future plan for efficiencies in treatment of cases so that the community and the office can work together to deal with this flood of community residents whose only place to go to ask about their trash ticket, their child's school suspension, or their Medicaid benefit mistake is the office. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. And Rebecca, sorry, I thought you were in the Zoom, so please go ahead with your testimony.
Thank you so much. Good morning. My name is Rebecca Steele, and I'm testifying in my capacity as an attorney at Legal Aid DC. Legal Aid practices at OAH to help district residents achieve access to the benefits that we've already heard about this morning, including food assistance, cash assistance, medical insurance coverage, along with many others. As we've heard, if a district family is deprived of those benefits, OAH is often the only place they can go to achieve access to the benefits they're entitled to. But in recent months, backlogs and delays have impeded OAH's ability to fulfill its role, leaving families waiting months longer to access their benefit entitlements. The proposed budget cuts will exacerbate this issue. Specifically, as we've heard from the other panelists this morning, the proposed budget cuts will worsen OAH's existing case backlogs and undermine OAH's technology modernization efforts. At a time when caseloads are rising dramatically, the operating budget should see a corresponding increase, not a decrease. So first, to address the impact on backlogs, we've already heard about the 27% increase in cases filed in fiscal year 2023 compared to fiscal year 2022. And I want to point out that based on the cases filed in the first quarter of fiscal year 2024, OAH is on track to see an even larger increase in case numbers this year. Increases in public benefit cases in particular have been severe. Fiscal year 2023 saw a 50% increase in cases involving the Department of Human Services compared to fiscal year 2022, and 3 times as many cases involving the Department of Healthcare Finance, which includes cases where people cannot access medication or services or cannot access the number of home health aid hours that they need. OAH has not been able to keep up with this increased case volume, resulting in backlogs across numerous areas, and we're particularly concerned about the backlogs in safety net benefit cases. Families receiving SNAP or TANF, cash or food assistance benefits, often have no other income. A delay of a month or more means that for each day within that period, that family has no money to purchase food, pay rent, or access other necessities. By the time a case is finally heard, that family may have already been evicted, gone hungry, or been deprived of medication that Medicaid should have covered. That harm is irreversible. As described in oversight testimony by Legal Aid and others, these delays also bring the district out of compliance with federal SNAP timeliness standards. In the first quarter of fiscal year 2024, the average time it took OAH to close SNAP cases was 79 days, almost a full month longer than the deadline of 60 days set by federal regulations. And given this current state of affairs, Legal Aid is particularly concerned to see funding cuts in adjudication support, specifically case management, and administrative adjudication services, specifically judicial assistance and legal counsel. Investment in these adjudicatory functions of OAH is crucial to ensure that OAH can timely resolve cases. We are also concerned to see the reduction in continuing full-time funding. As everyone has mentioned, OAH needs increased funding in order to hire and retain staff, and in particular, administrative support staff, as demonstrated in Chief Judge Curry's testimony and in a third-party study that many folks have mentioned this morning. Second, more funding is needed for information and technology services. The proposed budget also shows a decrease in this area, despite the fact that OAH is currently in the process of undertaking crucial and overdue modernization efforts. Over the past few years, OAH has made the transition from default in-person hearings to default remote hearings, and the use of video and teleconferencing technology will continue indefinitely. More recently, OAH launched an e-filing portal, and as you've heard, it's on track to launch a searchable database of cases later this year. Our oversight testimony detailed the importance of each of these efforts, but these initiatives will not be successful without increased funding. While the e-filing portal is now live, it has significant room for improvement, which is part of the reason that the portal was used for less than 1% of cases in fiscal year 2023. Performing user testing and committing resources to making improvements responses to the results of those testing is crucial. Similarly, while Legal Aid looks forward to the launch of the searchable database of final orders, we are concerned about limitations in its proposed search functionality. Having public access to final orders will not be meaningful without a way to search for relevant cases. In order to ensure these modernization efforts are successful, the cuts must be reversed and funding for information and technology must be increased. Finally, I'd like to flag that the development of the Resource Center shows that investing in OAH translates to concrete benefits for district residents in need of assistance, and we're appreciative of the efforts of this council to increase that funding last year. In conclusion, to effectively serve all district residents, OAH needs enough staff to facilitate timely adjudication of its rising caseload and needs sufficient resources to be able to follow through on new technology initiatives. The proposed budget is insufficient to accomplish these goals, and we ask that the council reverse the proposed budget cuts. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. We're going to now turn to our virtual panel, beginning with Naasa Mitchell.
Good morning. My name is Neasia Mitchell. I currently reside in DC and work at Bread for the City as a legal fellow. Bread for the City is a nonprofit organization located in Northwest and Southeast DC. We provide food, clothing, medical, legal, and social services to thousands of low-income district residents each year. Most of our clients rely on public benefit programs, Medicaid, SNAP, TANF, DC Healthcare Alliance, or interim disability assistance. Bread for the City's legal clinic runs a public benefits practice in which we advocate for clients who are not receiving public benefits to which they are legally entitled. While assisting and advocating for our clients, Bread for the City's legal clinic often appears before the Office of Administrative Hearings and regularly participates in Access to Justice Commission meetings in an effort to continue building relationships between community advocates and OAH. We also staff the OAH Legal Assistance Network hotline, OLAN, a hotline staffed by several legal service providers in DC to provide legal assistance to residents with matters pending before OAH. While we admire efforts to fund and establish a robust OAH resource center and hope those efforts continue, we have some concerns regarding OAH's budget. We hope the council will provide support and oversight to OAH to help resolve these concerns. The council can support OAH by providing increased funding so that OAH can both hire and retain administrative law judges and support staff. Clients are facing unreasonable delays getting their hearings scheduled at OAH. It is common for clients to seek our help with matters before OAH after being unable to resolve the issue informally with the Department of Human Services or the Department of Healthcare Finance. Currently, we are seeing matters being scheduled over 60 days out from when the appeal was requested at OAH. This means that a client who had their benefits terminated in the beginning of March 2024 and immediately requested an appeal may not be scheduled for their first hearing on the matter until about May or June. In contrast, in the past, OAH was able to schedule hearings within about 2 weeks. Currently, at Bread for the City, we have several clients who are suffering while waiting for their initial hearings. Due to the current state of the economy, our clients simply cannot afford to wait months to have issues with their benefits resolved. This is resulting in our clients going months without benefits to which they are legally entitled, including SNAP and health insurance. As a DC resident, I'm concerned about the impact these scheduling delays will have with the summer months approaching and people desperately needing their benefits while children are out of school. Due to the apparent staffing shortages, people are unable to reach OAH by phone. It is common for DC residents to contact OLAN when they are having trouble reaching OAH. These are frequently people who already filed an appeal, but have not received any information regarding their appeal. Sometimes DC residents are trying to contact OAH because they would like to confirm information about their hearing or are struggling to access their hearing remotely. In all of the described circumstances, callers tried to contact OAH, but simply were not able to get into contact with anyone. I myself, while advocating for clients, have experience trying to get into contact with OAH to confirm hearing information. I left a voicemail, but never received a return call. It is imperative that OAH is able to hire and retain staff to help handle day-to-day office operations. The council can support OAH by providing increased funding for technological support staff. Additional funding is also needed to support OAH's technological operations. Currently, unless requested to be in person, all matters occur virtually via the WebEx platform. There have been several instances where I have dialed into a hearing, but still had difficulty accessing the hearing remotely. Clients are also facing the same technological barriers. Clients are sometimes unable to dial into hearing themselves and reach out to OAH when they encounter problems. Because calls to OAH frequently go unanswered, some clients completely miss their scheduled hearings. Currently, unless the hearing is requested to be in person, there's no other option other than to join a hearing by phone. This is not a burden that should be placed on DC residents and their advocates. OAH needs funding to address technological barriers and to make remote hearings more accessible to DC residents. We are concerned that the proposed budget specifically suggests reducing funds allocating towards improving technological staff, despite the need for technological improvement. It has become apparent that OAH is both overwhelmed and understaffed, including judges and other support staff that help OAH run smoothly. We are concerned that with the proposed budget cuts, these issues will not only persist, but become worse in a time in which DC residents are in need of benefits. Last, we hope the council continues to support efforts to ensure that OAH has an established resource center. Although OLAN assists residents once they are directed to the hotline, we frequently receive calls from DC residents looking for resources but other matters before OAH. It is important that DC residents are able to rely on the resource center to provide initial guidance and resources as they navigate matters before OAH. We thank you for your time and attention and look forward to your advocacy and swift action to remedy these issues. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. And we'll now hear from Danielle Burrs.
Good morning, Chairperson Nadeau and members of the committee. My name is Danielle Burrs, and I am testifying in my role as Senior Policy Counsel for the Council for Court Excellence, also known as CCE. CCE is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization with a mission to enhance justice for all in the District of Columbia. For over 40 years, CCE has worked to improve the
Danielle.
administration of justice.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Your sound is going out. It may be your headset.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's just made you very quiet.
Is this better?
Yeah, just make sure you project a little. I think that's part of it too.
Okay, thank you.
Great. I'll let you know if it goes out again. Please
Thank
continue.
you. Please note that in accordance with our policy, no judicial member of CCE participated in the formulation or approval of this testimony. This testimony does not reflect the specific views of or endorsement by any judicial member of CCE. CCE advocated for the creation of the Office of Administrative Hearings beginning in 1999 and has supported its mission ever since. Over the years, OAH's jurisdiction and caseloads have grown, increasing the importance of its role in ensuring fair and robust administrative adjudication in the district, though not always matched with additional funding. In 2016, CCE developed a report on behalf of the DC auditor, which made a variety of recommendations for the continued improvement of OAH, which I know the committee is familiar with. CCE's performance oversight testimony for OAH this year compared recent OAH commission studies from the B. McNamee Consulting Court Feasibility Study and Mondrian Consulting Rapid Technology Assessment to CCE's 2016 report and found significant overlap. Our understanding is that staffing increases and IT investments are critical to OAH's ability to make progress on the improvements outlined by the CCE, B. McNamee, and Mondrian reports, as well as by my colleagues here today. At its current funding levels, before the proposed FY25 cuts, OAH may also need additional capacity to carry out core report recommendations, like regular staff meetings, data collection and review, and other good internal practices. And what I mean by that is if they're already overwhelmed with the core functions they have to do, there's not necessarily room for an all-staff meeting, even though that's really important to get all of these recommendations implemented, analyzed, and get everyone on board. I will keep it short because my colleagues went first and covered a lot of things that we've all been talking about together. I do want to say that we are very pleased that OAH will be rolling out a searchable database of OAH orders this year, and sincerely hope that the other needed improvements that were funded in the FY24 budget or recommended by DC government's own consultants will be funded as completely as possible. I also want to say, as my colleagues have mentioned, these cuts hurt the same people who are suffering from other more obvious social service cuts. So OAH might not be something that people think of right away when they think about critical services for lower income folks, but this is about benefits that people need to survive and feed their families. This is about unemployment. This is about people who are usually self-represented. So I think making sure that the OAH ALJs have the time and resources to make the best possible outcomes in situations where folks generally don't have representation, but the stakes are extremely high, is something that we should think about as a social service issue. Thank you so much for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Okay, so questions for our witnesses. A number of you talked about the need for IT improvements at OAH and some of the issues that you've seen. Are there other IT issues we should be aware of that no one covered today? I want to make sure we got it all. Okay. How do you anticipate the proposed cuts may impact the timeliness of case resolutions and the ability of district residents to seek redress for grievances against government agencies? Anyone who wants to answer is welcome.
I'm happy to start us off on that. And I think many of us spoke to this exact issue. So I'm glad you raised it, as I do think it's one of my biggest concerns in my practice as an attorney at OAH. Already we've seen, as folks have testified to, huge delays. We have cases filed weeks ago that haven't been scheduled yet, and it doesn't seem likely that those cases will be resolved within the 60-day timeline that is mandatory in federal regulations. We've seen many cases stretching beyond that already. And as the upwards trajectory of case filings continues to rise, while staffing numbers stay steady, or in some cases even drop with vacancies being unable to be filled, we anticipate that those delays will extend much longer. And we've all talked about the impact of those delays, which is that families are going hungry, unable to access urgent medical treatment, and all kinds of other collateral consequences as a result. So I think there's a very direct correlation between the impact of this budget and having longer delays in initially processing cases. And in addition to the initial hearing date, which we've seen become more delayed both in regular hearings and even emergency hearings as well. The other thing to keep in mind is that it takes longer. Many cases are resolved through a series of hearings, and the time period between each of those hearings is also stretching out. So you may have a hearing where you decide the next steps, but you have to wait weeks longer to get back in front of that judge to confirm whether the agency did or did not take those steps. So we see this being very concerning delays throughout the entirety of the process.
Thank you. That's helpful to understand. How quickly do you all anticipate the effects of the budget cuts to be noticed, especially if there are insufficient staff to fill in as permanent staff turns over?
Well, I'll just start. I mean, I think we're seeing it already. I mean, we're already hearing from OAH that they, in the McNamee report, which the data was years old now, they reported that they were unable to keep up with case volume. We know case volume is rising. We're hearing from providers today about delays in case efficiency. So I think we'll see them immediately. And I'm also concerned that there are current vacancies in FY24 that could potentially be filled. Will there be a disincentive, not to fill those because the budget will not be available next year? So, we could see impacts of these cuts in this current fiscal year, let alone the next one. So I think, it's a dire situation.
Another area to focus on is the help available to people who want to bring a case or have a case. The present capability is only one person to assist 32,000 filers, most of whom lack lawyers and are just troubled by the problem, not able to grasp all the details of the OAH problem-solving process. The present system is to make a phone call, and we've heard that it's overwhelmed and doesn't have the ability to call back often. Only about 800 people manage to get served by the Resource Center by calling in a recent annual count. Thousands more made phone calls and couldn't connect, and a position to be added to augment this capacity is being cut. This doesn't make sense. You're going to have more people confused, unable to follow the protocols of the office, which will slow down everybody's work. Let's beef up this essential help desk so that people can get in, show the photographs that show that their trash cans weren't overflowing on the day claimed, or that their child didn't commit the infraction that got them suspended. Some of these cases can be handled very quickly, and anything that speeds up user access and prompt solutions helps everyone. Another technology piece, going back to your earlier question, that's worth mentioning is to authorize somehow the agency, the Office of Administrative Hearings, to set standards for case handling by agencies so that they get prompt and full information from agencies so they can evaluate a citizen complaint. The transmission of information is 19th century, to say the least. I have sat in the resource center and watched people arrive from DC government agencies with file boxes saying, here's the materials from our office that you needed for this week's cases. The transmission of information to the office is in the hands of dozens of agencies, and apparently the office lacks the authority to arrange these matters efficiently and technologically and in a 21st century manner. Whatever they need in terms of authority and stimulation to get materials delivered efficiently, that would be a huge advance.
And if I may just quickly, that integration with agency systems is one specific example that Chief Judge Curry mentioned during performance oversight that OAH was hoping to do with increased technology support. So it
Right.
directly addresses Mr. Mulhauser's point.
Thank you.
If
Ms.
I
Hurst?
could add, thank you. Just quickly, one of the things I noticed in reading over the budget, and apologies if I'm misinterpreting this, but it seems that there's a cut to the temporary services that OAH uses to do a lot of the data entry and data management. And I don't know what the replacement for that is when they're already understaffed. So I'd be anxious to know how that would be resolved if that cut remains.
Thank you for highlighting that. Appreciate it. How should OAH include users in the design of new IT systems?
I'm happy to start us off on that. And again, one thing I think we've been talking about is user testing. So I think, for example, for the e-filing portal, there is a portal in existence. It's very difficult to navigate and often generates error messages that prevent us from uploading attachments, which unfortunately makes it unusable for a filing that can't be uploaded. And so at this stage in the process, I think it would be really helpful to bring in pro se folks who are navigating the system on their own, advocates, other folks who are practicing at OAH to actually test the interface and see specifically what areas for improvements. When it comes to something like the searchable portal, which hasn't even been launched yet, it would be really helpful to host consultation sessions with folks who would be using that portal. And again, that includes residents who are representing themselves, as well as advocates who are there on behalf of others, to determine what kind of functionality will actually allow this to serve its intended purpose. What are the roadblocks folks are hitting when they try to use the existing interface? What are the pain points, and how do we make this process smoother? So I think it's really a matter of being in direct conversation with the users on the other side of that to understand what are the functionalities that are needed, and are we actually able to accomplish that? If not, how do we make improvements? And I think that this has to be an iterative process to get to the best possible outcome. And that's why ongoing funding is important, even for something like the e-filing portal, which is technically already launched.
Are there other e-filing portals or searchable databases you would point to as exemplary that we should model?
Yeah, I think that they're even in the Superior Court and the DC Court of Appeals, each have their own e-filing systems. And, all of them have their difficulties. It's a tall order to have a system that's able to accomplish this much. But some of the functionalities that those portals have include the ability to search by by parties' names, which I don't believe is an option on this. Other functionalities like that, as well as just the interface itself and the clear navigation prompts, are all things that could be improved upon, I think, from looking to those other examples that we have here in the district with equivalent systems at Superior Court and the Court of Appeals.
As you recall, we've been advocating in this area for some years, and exactly your instinct is perfect. We've looked at other states to gain lessons from how they coped with the same challenges of allowing access to opinions. After all, there's tens of thousands of them. This is no small task, but you can go on the state of California Central Administrative System and see a ready example of how they cope with all the challenges of searching the database and making sure that personally identifiable information doesn't spill out into the public area. All the things that we're coping with here, these are well-trod paths and solutions in places like New York State, California, and so forth are quite familiar. And software vendors can help as well because there's such a robust market around the country. Medicaid complaint decisions by law must be publicly available. So 50 states are coping with the same challenge. And we hope that the vendors that are helping OAH with this will draw on best practices elsewhere and build us something that works. But as colleagues have said, trying it out on the user is a best practice of software development and is essential when the users are not necessarily technologically sophisticated. We just have to do this right as we're making this important step, as other states have done for years.
Ms. Burrs?
Thank you. I just wanted to add that there are other resources out there, such as the Law and Technology Institute that's at Georgetown, that probably could give us a good rundown of best practices for these things in other jurisdictions, in addition to what folks have already found, if we need to update anything that's already been discussed or we have specific issues.
Great, thank you. Ms. Mitchell, you noted that OAH used to hear cases within 2 weeks. How long ago was this? And that was the case.
Yes, so I'm referencing, honestly, even my time when I first started on the public benefits team here at Red for the City. So about just 2 years ago, we were able to see cases like resolved or scheduled a lot sooner. As of the end of last year, we've been seeing cases with significant delays as far as scheduling being scheduled over 60 days out.
Thank you.
It's interesting to take a note of the data that could help us in this discussion. Time to disposition is a metric that's worth measuring, publicizing, setting goals for. The National Center for State Courts took a look at the landscape of civil justice in state courts a few years back and studied with 1 million cases in a data sample, time to disposition for different kinds of cases, whether the subject matter, whether the parties had counsel or not, and so on, and came to very, very important findings about how civil justice in the courts cost too much and took too much time. But it rested on having the data about time to disposition. And with the council's encouragement, we hope the OAH might one day publicize what I hope is already internal data, but show some metrics about time to disposition or time between hearing and opinion. Metrics of the use of time, just as you were asking about, are amenable to analysis using their case database, and we hope those data would be public someday.
Thank you. Well, thank you all to this panel. I truly appreciate your testimony.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you. Is Damon Donaldson Bay here to testify? Great. Then I believe that concludes our public witnesses. Thank you. All right. We are now going to turn to our government witnesses. We will be joined right here at the witness table by the Chief Administrative Law Judge at the Office of Administrative Hearings, Judge Colleen M. Curry, as well as Lachelle Jenkins, the Chief Operating Officer, and Shelley Graham, the Agency Fiscal Officer at the Office of the Chief Administrative Office of the Chief Fiscal Officer. And before you get too comfy, I will administer the oath to you, so you can just set up and Raise your right hand. Go. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give to the Committee of Public Works and Operations is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Very good. Thank you. When you are ready, you may begin your testimony, Judge Curry.
Good morning, Chairman Nadeau, committee members, and staff. My name is Colleen Curry, and I'm the Chief Administrative Law Judge for OAH. Thank you for allowing me to address you today about the proposed fiscal year 2025 budget for the Office of Administrative Hearings. I am joined this morning by OAH's Chief Operating Officer, Lachelle Jenkins, and Budget Director for the Public Safety and Justice Cluster, Shelley Graham, both of whom are available to answer any technical questions you or the committee members may have. OAH's fiscal year 2025 proposed gross budget is approximately $11.6 million and supports 92 full-time equivalent positions. This budget amount comprises entirely local funds and $300,000 in Medicaid grant funds. The largest single expenditure of our gross budget, 93%, is approximately $10.8 million for personnel services funding. The remainder, approximately $826,000, is for non-personnel services funding. Overall, OAH's budget reflects a 5.9% reduction from our approved budget for fiscal year 2024. This net reduction is due to a combination of factors. In non-personnel services, the fiscal year 2025 budget reflects a reduction of $408,000, composed of a $10,000 reduction in OAH's budget for conference fees, a $13,000 reduction in interpretation services, the elimination of $10,000 for IT equipment, and the elimination of $375,000 in funding for temporary contractual workers. In personnel services, the fiscal year 2025 budget includes a $570,000 increase to account for cost of living, fringe, and step increases, and increases related to the collective bargaining agreements applicable to OAH employees. It also includes a $1.2 million reduction in funds for personnel services. While the net effect is a 2.9% reduction in funding for personnel services, OAH will need to maintain vacancies in 10% of its FTEs, 10 positions, to meet its budget. OAH understands that the current fiscal climate means budgetary reductions are necessary. However, as we discussed last year at our fiscal year 2024 budget oversight hearing, as well as at our fiscal year 2023 performance oversight hearing in January this year, OAH continues to be concerned about backlogs of cases that currently exist and OAH's ability to address those backlogs efficiently, effectively, and in a timely manner, while timely adjudicating an increasing caseload. Earlier this year, I reported that in the first quarter of fiscal year 24, 8,678 new cases were filed, at which rate we were projected to see more than 34,000 new cases, or a 30% increase from fiscal year 2023. We now have the data for quarter two. In the second quarter of fiscal year 2024, OAH saw approximately 7,300 new cases filed, for a total of roughly 16,000 new cases in the first half of fiscal year 2024. At this rate, OAH is projected to see approximately 32,000 new cases, a 21% increase from fiscal year 2023. We have in the past few years utilized non-personnel funding for temporary contractual workers to address the backlogs in processing cases and keep current on newly filed cases. The proposed fiscal year 2025 non-personnel services budget eliminates the opportunity to continue this practice. And again, while we understand the budget constraints for the district as a whole in fiscal year 2025, I mention this to flag the impact of the proposed budget on our continued ability to process and adjudicate cases in a timely manner in light of the increased case filing and resulting backlogs that we previously discussed at our performer oversight hearing, as well as our ability to provide statutorily required interpretation services for our litigants. In closing, OAH thanks Mayor Bowser and you, Chairman Nadeau, for your collective guidance and continued support as OAH continues to focus on our core mandate. That is to adjudicate the cases brought before us as efficiently and as fairly as possible, with the broader goal of providing the best service possible to the communities we serve. That includes ensuring equal access to our hearings, continuing to identify ways we can remove barriers to broad participation in those hearings, remaining attuned to the needs of the communities we serve, and adapting those needs where possible, and being mindful about stewardship of the public resources entrusted to us in engagement with our stakeholders to respond not only to their concerns, but also to the needs of our litigants. I would like to thank Chief Operating Officer Lachelle Jenkins, Public Safety and Justice Cluster Budget Director Shelley Graham, Agency Fiscal Officer Judith Diaz, and Administrative Officer Nicole Green for their assistance in preparing for this hearing. I would also like to extend my sincere gratitude to the staff at OAH for their steadfast commitment to administering justice on behalf of the residents of the district. Thank you for your time today, and we are happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I want to begin by asking some questions offered to council by our Office on Race Equity that will help the committee better understand any racial disparities that may exist in agency operations. In your proposed FY25 budget, are there specific programs or allocations that are specifically designed to address racial or economic inequities faced by district residents? Sure.
If I understand your question, you're asking about whether the budget provides specific funding for addressing any racial inequities in our litigants. Is that my understanding of your question? The budget doesn't include anything specific to address that.
Which reductions for FY25 may burden certain communities more than others?
I think that the reduction in our IT equipment, the equipment that we have in our hearing rooms is antiquated at best. And in order to provide better services for litigants who have specifically hearing issues or sight issues, we really need to revamp that equipment and improve it. And cutting our IT equipment budget will have an impact on our ability to do that.
As part of the next budget season, how could community members, especially communities of color and low-income communities, be engaged or consulted to identify programming or service needs for your agency?
We work very closely with OLAN and with our legal services providers, the Access to Justice community, to try to get as much input as possible from our litigants, especially those who are unrepresented and tend to go to our Resource Center for Help and the legal resources communities. So we have a very good conversation, continuing conversation with them.
Thank you. I'm very concerned about the mayor's proposed cuts to your agency. So I want to start big picture. How bad could backlogs get at the agency due to the mayor's proposed cuts?
I think that we've shown in the past that our ability to timely adjudicate cases has been impacted by our inability to fill the positions that we have now. Putting any stop on our ability to fill those positions in the future and not expanding our FTE count to adjust for the increased caseload we have is only going to extend that. We've already seen it and I think it was Ms. Drain who talked about that, that we've already seen that impact and it's just going to grow.
Given the projected increased caseload, what are things going to look like at the agency realistically?
I don't have a good answer for that because it really will depend a lot on where we see the most increases. Do we see a larger percentage of, for example, healthcare finance cases, or are the increases in other areas where we don't have a current backlog? If it's impacting areas where we already have a backlog, we'd have to look to see how many more, how we can rearrange our staff to try and address that to assist. So it's sort of, it's an art, not a science at this
Mhm.
point. So I can't give you a really solid answer.
You probably can extrapolate based on the trends you've seen, though, where you see the most increased caseload, because a lot of it's based on changes in policy that are going to continue, right?
And that's the increases that we've seen in our public benefits have been, a lot of that is tied to the end of the federal public health emergency. And as those benefits are ending, or the moratoria are ending, we're seeing increased caseloads. And as budgets for some of the programs are being cut, we're seeing more and more people needing, asking to have those extended. So definitely we can see that effect.
You noted in testimony that your projected increase in caseload for FY24 is 21%. Do you think it's likely to increase even more than that, given cuts to other agencies?
I would not be surprised if it does. And, we have, as you saw and as you heard, we had, in first quarter, we had a larger increase than in second quarter, but that doesn't, so we're waiting to see what third quarter will bring.
Right.
And then what fourth quarter. Our hearings have some cycles to them. And the usually second quarter, first quarter tends to be higher than second quarter. But it'll be interesting to see where we land in quarter 3 and quarter 4. for this
So
year.
Q1 was up, Q2 was a little lower,
It's still up a lot higher than last year, but it's
lower than Q1.
overall, it's only 20% for the first half of the year. The first quarter was 30%. So we had a larger increase in the first quarter than in the second quarter. It's still
It's still an
It's
increase.
still an increase.
Yeah. Okay.
And just to sort of put this in larger context, for example, our cases from the Department of Public Works are nowhere near the levels that we saw in 2018. And that's usually our largest jurisdiction. It still is not quite at the level where it was before. So if and when DPW starts to do more enforcement, we'll see more cases.
Right, and this committee funded more enforcement positions for DPW,
So we'll see more cases.
Okay. Will there be a change in how you measure the effectiveness of your programs and services under this budget?
We keep, every month we do an analysis of where the cases were filed, what time, we have a snapshot every month, at the end of every month, to take a look at those. That's been really, really helpful in starting to see trends early on to try and understand things. So I don't think that at this point we see any change, because that the way we're doing it now really informs us as how we're doing. And we run the reports at the end of the month, and then I talk to the clusters and those cases, the judges who oversee those cases, once a month, just to get a test, sort of test the waters to see where they are and what we need to do to try to improve. And there are some times where at this point, we're doing everything we can, and it's just not enough.
Okay. This is something that we've talked about a little bit before, but is the Office of Administrative Hearings consulted by OCFO when they are writing fiscal impact statements?
Sometimes. We have occasionally been consulted when legislation is being drafted. But most of the time it's after it's been drafted and they're looking at the fiscal impact statement. And that's not always either, and I'll have to say either from council or from the mayor's office.
Sure.
And so some of the impacts of legislation that's being proposed that we weren't consulted on before it was drafted will have larger impacts, especially if there are very tight deadlines that are written into the statute without reaching out to us to say, is this practical?
But that sounds like legislation where you're specifically named.
Where, sorry?
Where your agency is specifically named or implicated. What I would like to get at, which will be wildly unpopular among my colleagues, is what is the true cost of legislation that may lead to more cases at OAH, even though if it's not implied in the bill.
And therein lies the rub, because I don't think, we try very carefully to review all new legislation that's coming through to see if any of it will have an impact on us. In it, we do that on a weekly basis, just to see. A lot of times, the thought process in increasing an enforcement area, for example, in the Department of Buildings, nobody thinks how this is going to impact the cases that come to us and whether it's going to be an increase, and to ask us whether there's a fiscal impact. So I don't think anybody thinks about that.
No, and I'm just thinking about the difference between you and the Office of Human Rights. When we're amending the Human Rights Act, OHR always gets to jump in and say, this is going to cost us, right? You're going to have to give us an extra FTE.
Yeah.
But OAH doesn't seem to get consulted in the same way because it's more implicit.
Right.
Okay, I don't exactly know how to fix that, but we'll think about it.
Thank you.
Yeah, it just, like I said, wildly unpopular, I'm sure, to everybody trying to fund their bills, but it doesn't help in the end if people can't get the thing
Right.
that the law is supposed to be giving them, because they can't get a fair hearing. So, okay.
And in the cases where we are consulted, generally, the impact that we've been consulted about is incremental. So if you have a one-off where it's an incremental increase, it doesn't have an impact. But if you have 4 or 5 of those in a year, incremental increases collectively could mean that we're going to be short.
Right.
And at what point, it's trying to figure out at what point do you say, well, we've had all of these increases, incremental increases over the last 2 budget cycles, but now we're at the point where, yeah, okay, it's too much.
So when you see legislation that you think will have an impact on your operations, what do you do?
We try to reach out to the agency that's directly impacted to understand what their anticipation, what they anticipate seeing coming to us as a result of that. Because a lot of times we see it after it's been proposed.
Right. Right. Okay. Yeah, I'm almost thinking of like a formula that we could apply to bills that impact certain services. So we can think about that a little bit. I didn't come here to be popular, right? So, all right, let's talk about personnel services, because I know this is a hot topic here. So what is the agency's fringe benefits rate?
For this year or for next year?
For next year.
21.1%, that's next.
You want to do 20?
It went
24
from,
also?
this year is 20.6 and it went up to 21.1 next
Okay.
year.
Thank you. Okay, adjudication support is seeing a 27.25% reduction in FY25. What's covered under adjudication support, and how will this cut impact agency operations?
Adjudication support is our clerk's office, the individuals who process cases. So if when a case is filed with OAH, they're the ones who do the data entry. And then prepare all of the electronic file for the judge for the hearing. And when an order is issued, make sure that the order is served properly and our case management system is updated properly. So they're the ones who do all the data entry and process the case.
And we're still doing manual data entry for most cases except for
Yes.
DPW?
DPW is the only case type right now that we have an interface with their eSuite program and our eCourt program. And so we don't do any manual data entry. The cases still are reviewed. Once it comes through the portal, the cases are reviewed to make sure that everything is correct in it before it's finalized and sent to be scheduled for hearing or await an answer. So there is still a lot of manual data entry.
Can you move the mic a little closer to you? Or that works too.
Is that better?
Yeah, you could also lower it. I think it would get you a little better. Just the wand itself. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I want to make sure everybody can hear you. I can hear you, but okay. So how will that cut, the 27.25 reduction impact agency operations?
That's the vacancy savings that we had to apply. And so it would mean that's part of where we would not be able to fill positions if they are vacant at the end of this fiscal year.
How many were you hoping to fill?
All of them?
Which is how many?
Well, that was at the beginning of the year. Do we know? At the beginning of the fiscal year, we had 24 vacancies. The majority of those were in our adjudication support. We've successfully filled several of them. I don't have the numbers right off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay. But
And
it's a large number.
And we are actively recruiting. There's a job fair that DCHR is putting on that we're participating in. So we are actively recruiting. And if I can say that at the end of April, our resource center will be fully staffed.
Great.
We
Which is how
are
many people?
4. What? No. Yeah, 4. Our resource center manager, the 2 program analysts, and then the resource center coordinator. And that is the last position to be filled, and we expect the person on board towards the end of this month. So
Okay.
that would be, the resource center would be fully staffed.
So you're actively recruiting for these vacancies
We are, and we have been.
and you're having a job fair where you could hire people, at which point you'd have to say, sorry, this job's only till October 1st?
No, we'd be able to fill it now. And then, did you want to address that?
Yeah, so, is this?
That's
is this
great.
good?
Just, yeah, you're good.
Okay, so council member, even though we did apply vacancy savings to the 25 budget, the way vacancy savings works is just based on the current pattern of vacancy rate. So even though it's applied to the budget, we are working with the agency in helping them fill. We're not stopping them from any recruitment. And any recruitment that happens during this year, we will allow it to continue into next year and just work with them on, how things will be funded. So.
Okay. The court counsel department across various activities has seen a 22.04% reduction in the proposed FY25 budget, a significant decrease. Can you expand on the what are included in the activities in the court counsel department?
The court counsel is our general counsel's office. The general counsel's office is the one that does a lot of the background research into upcoming legislation, helps the judges prepare bench books. They do litigation support for the agency as a whole. And our paralegals in the general counsel's office also help the judges to prepare cases for adjudication.
Thank you very much. Will the reduction affect operations?
We'll be able to fill the vacancies that we're recruiting for, and we should not have any vacancies left over into fiscal year 25. At least not any that we're seeking to fill.
Of the 92 FTEs budgeted at OAH, how many are currently vacant?
I don't have that number, sorry, off the top of my head, since it has decreased since the beginning of the year.
Okay, you can get back to me?
Yep.
Okay. For the vacant positions that are not kept vacant to maintain vacancy savings, what's the plan for filling those vacancies?
We are actively recruiting to fill those. It's unfortunately, some of the positions we've posted for 3 or 4 times, and the quality of the candidates has not met our basic requirements. And so we've had to post again.
Okay.
And that is a problem that we see, especially in the clerk's office. And then the other issue that we have is we have candidates that we really would like, but we can't offer them the money that they're seeking. And that is the issue that we've had filling our IT positions, our additional 2 IT positions. The candidates either were not qualified, or if they were qualified, wanted more money than we could offer them.
How far off are we in terms of the salary we can offer?
My understanding is that in particular IT, it's between $10,000 and $20,000.
What about other positions?
With the other positions, I'd have to go and talk to our HR specialist to get a better feeling for that. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
It looks like the proposed budget contains a 3% reduction in salaries. How will that impact your ability to hire and retain staff?
It's not a reduction in salaries, it's just the vacancy savings.
Okay, thank you.
We currently have 28 positions vacant.
Oh, okay. All right, moving on to non-personnel services. I see a 35.8% reduction in contractual services for administrative adjudication services. What contracts are being cut?
That's the temporary workers contract. So that's the staffing services that we work with to bring in temporary workers to fill in the vacancies and the gaps for our vacancies with FTEs. They're the ones who do the data, the basic data entry at the beginning and end to fill in for the staffing, the full-time employees that we are currently vacant that we're having trouble filling.
So your temps are getting cut and your staff are getting cut. So how's that going to work?
Doesn't look very pretty, does it?
No. And I would rather restore your staffing, but it seems like because of the time it takes to fill those positions, you probably need both, right?
Yes, the time it takes to fill a position is on average about, it's longer than 70 days to fill a position. Contractual services, we generally can get somebody in very quickly. There is still training. The benefit of having full-time employees that stay for longer than 6 months is that you don't have to continually train them. Refresher training, yes, but not new onboarding training. With the temporary workers, we tend to have to train repeatedly because that's a high turnover too, but it's much easier to fill those temporary workers and much quicker.
Yeah.
So it's a balance.
For sure. I
Yeah.
mean, everybody has that
Yeah.
issue. Is that recurring or one-time funds, that temp cut, the cut for temps? Contractual cut?
I don't know if it's a permanent cut.
Okay, but the funds, they were recurring funds?
Yeah, they
Yeah.
were recurring funds.
So can you describe the impact that cutting the temps is gonna have?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry, hold on, let me just say, is the 374 all temps or is there other contracts in there?
That's all temporary services, but as I said, there's also non-temporary services that are reduced. The $10,000 for IT equipment was reduced. 13,000 for out of our interpretation services contract, that was reduced. And then there was another 10,000 for conference fees. And those are trainings that we send when a new judge comes on board. In particular, there is the National Judicial College has a new judge training that we send the judges to. which is extremely beneficial. And that's one of the things, we can't guarantee when we onboard new judges. Don't have any anticipated at this point for next year, but that doesn't mean it. If we have a new judge come on, we'll need to send them to that training. So that's one of the things that gets cut.
Do you have ALJ vacancies?
Not right now, no.
Okay. So what is the impact day to day of all of these cuts on your operations?
The contractual services we've talked at length about, and that will make our case processing slower because we won't have as many staff who are able to do that. And we've just talked about the training, the interpretation services. The Human Rights Act requires us to provide interpretation for anybody who requests it or who is limited English proficiency. And this would reduce that budget for us to be able to do that. It's
So you would
typically-
be out of compliance with the Human Rights Act and the Language Access Act too.
We would hope that we'd be able to move funds around and not have that, but reducing the amount that's specifically tagged for that does put us in danger of doing that. And I have to say kudos to our language access coordinator over the last few years. We have always gotten high marks from the Office of Human Rights for our language access.
Right, and you're not in, like, there's not a lot of people in good company with you on that, a lot of agencies. So I don't want to see you backslide when we're still trying to get everybody else up to compliance.
Right. And we have multiple different methods, but if somebody calls our office and has a language issue, we can use Language Line, dial
Mhm.
them in. Better practice is to have a live interpreter scheduled in advance. If necessary, during a hearing, whether it's a remote hearing or an in-person hearing, a judge can call Language Line, but that tends to be off the cuff and not as helpful as a live person who we've scheduled in advance. We find those much better interpretation. And the impact would be a limitation on how often we could do that.
What impact will these cuts have on processing FOIA requests?
I don't think it'll have an impact on our ability to process FOIA requests.
There's an 87.5% reduction in office support for administrative adjudication services. Have we already covered this one? Did we talk about that? I'm trying to figure out what's happening with that one.
That's the temp services.
That's temps, okay.
That's temp services.
Okay. Considering the tight budget for FY25, are there any no-cost measures or adjustments the committee can implement to support the agency without incurring additional expenses?
I don't know the answer to that question. Let us think about it and get back to you on that one.
Sure. Do you think this proposed budget is sustainable?
It will seriously impact our ability to timely adjudicate cases.
Okay, so it'll seriously impact your ability to timely adjudicate cases, which is at the core of
That
your
is our core
agency.
function. That is our
Right.
core mission.
What happens when an administrative court is not meeting those federal timelines?
Different cases have different timelines statutorily. Some of them are DC law, some of them are federal. The example that I can give you is unemployment insurance cases have specific deadlines, percentages that we have to adjudicate cases from the Department of Labor. Not meeting that means that they flag it, the Department of Labor flags it, and it could eventually threaten funding from the Department of Labor. And we certainly don't want that to happen.
And threatens funding to our unemployment program or to our court?
To the adjudication services piece.
Would you mind sharing what budget enhancements you asked for? Hi.
We asked for budget enhancements to do IT upgrades for our courtrooms. The total off the top of my head, I think it was about $250,000.
Okay. Was that it?
Yes, for the most part.
Those are all the questions I have for you today.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you very much for your candid testimony. I truly appreciate it. This concludes today's budget oversight hearing. If you've not yet submitted written testimony and wish to do so, please do so by submitting it on the council's hearing management system. The record for this hearing will close at 5:30 p.m. on April 24th, 2024. I'd like to take a moment to remind everyone the Committee on Public Works and Operations will be holding a number of additional budget oversight hearings over the coming weeks. Please visit the council hearing management system for the committee's performance oversight hearing schedule and to sign up and testify. The time is now 10:28 a.m. and the hearing is adjourned.